you know, lots of times soldiers develop post-traumatic stress disorder because they go out on the battlefield. They're kind of naive, they're young guys, you know, and it actually is worse if they're not that bright, it turns out, because having a lower IQ is one of the things that predisposes you to post-traumatic stress disorder. But anyways, they go out in the battlefield and they see what they're capable of under battlefield conditions. And like, you know, we've been fighting wars for a very long time, millions of years. You know, chimps basically have wars with other chimps, the troops, right? Because the juveniles will patrol the perimeter of their territory, and if they find other chimps from other troops that they outnumber, they will tear them to pieces. Like, and chimps are really, really strong, and so when I say they'll tear them to pieces, I mean that literally. You know, they tear them to pieces. And Jane Goodall discovered that originally in the 1970s. She didn't even report it for a while because she was so shocked. You know, she kind of assumed, like most followers of Rousseau, that the human proclivity for warfare was that was something that was uniquely human. You know, it had something to do with our unique self-consciousness or our intelligence or something like that. She had no idea that it was rooted that deeply. You know, we split from chimps about 6-7 million years ago, something like that. And so we were patrolling territory. We were gang members 7 million years ago. And, you know, that's minimum estimation, because of course that ancestor shaded back maybe 20 million years into entities that were roughly primate-like. And so territoriality and the proclivity to defend territory is so deeply embedded in us. It's like the control center for our whole brain. And so there isn't anything more important to us, I would say, than maintaining the match between what we want to have happen and what other people are doing in response to our actions. Like, that's what we want. And as long as that match is maintained, then our emotional systems, and I would say anxiety is probably primary in that regard, our emotional systems remain inhibited. They're on, they're ready, like a nuclear reactor rods are on, and the rest of the brain dampens them down. But it's like, you don't want them to take time to start up, man. You want them to be on at a tenth of a second's notice when it's necessary. And so, you know, that's kind of why, well, if you look at a wild animal, it's like, it's alert, you know, it's ready to dart this way or that way, especially a prey animal, instantaneously, and it has reflexes built into it, as you do, that will respond way before you're conscious. So for example, if you happen to be walking down a trail and you detect something snake-like in the periphery, you'll leap away before you even know that you leapt. And that's because it takes a fair bit of time to actually see a snake, by which I mean form a conscious representation of the snake. You know, and maybe it takes a quarter of a second or something like that, or even longer. But it doesn't matter, maybe it takes 20th of a second, a tenth of a second. But the thing about the damn snake is it's way faster than that. It's really fast, that thing, and it co-evolved with primates, by the way. And so it can nail you like way faster than you can look at it. So you have your eyes map snake-like objects right onto your reflexes, so that the eyes make you jump. And then they see after that. It's like, yeah, well, now you can see, that's no problem, you know. So, all right. Now, what I would say that what we do is we live in a shared story. And the story is a way of looking at the world, and it's a way of acting in the world at the same time. And that story has to operate within narrow parameters. And this is something that's extraordinarily important to understand. Because, and this is something I think that Piaget figured out, Jean Piaget figured out better than anyone else. I think he really got this right. And by the way, one of the things that Piaget was trying to do, you never hear about how strange these great thinkers are, but Piaget was a very strange guy, and he was a hyper genius. He was offered the curatorship of a bloody museum when he was 10 years old, you know, because he wrote this little paper on mollusks, which apparently was very good. And so they offered him the curatorship of a museum, and his parents wrote back and said, well, you know, no, probably not, because he's actually 10. And so that was Piaget, man. The guy was a genius. And you know, he was actually motivated by the desire to reconcile science and religion. That was actually his entire motivation for what he did. You never hear that, but that's the case. And so Piaget was very interested in how you produce structures that enable you to regulate yourself, because you're like a kind of a colony of strange sub-animals that have to figure out how to get along so that you can sort of be one thing. You kind of learn that, I would say, between the ages of 2 and 4 as you're being socialized. You know how erratic 2-year-olds are. I mean, they're a blast, and it's part because they're erratic. It's like they're unbelievably happy, and then they're unbelievably hungry, and then they're really hot, and then they're really upset and crying, you know, and then they're really scared. It's like, and all of that's just untrammeled, and so it's really fun to be around them, especially when they're happy, because they're so happy that it's just, you know, you don't ever get to be that happy. And so it's nice to be around a 2-year-old because you can kind of feel that again, you know. And a lot of one of the horrible things about being a parent is that you spend a tremendous amount of your time making your child less happy. And the reason for that is that positive emotion is very impulsive, you know, and you know, because everybody says, well, you should be happy. It's like, well, no, when you're happy you're actually quite stupid. And so, because happiness makes you impulsive, happiness says, hey, things are really good right now, get what you can while the getting's good. And so, like if you're hyper optimistic, manic, we'll say, it's like every stock investment looks like a really good stock investment. It's like you go out and spend all your money because look, there's those wonderful things everywhere and you could do such great things with them, and then, you know, you spend all your money and then you crash and you think, oh God, my life's over, you know, because I just spent all my money on all this useless stuff, and it's all under the grip of impulsive positive emotion, you know. And so when you're telling your kids to be quiet and settle down, it isn't because they're making a lot of noise being in pain, it's because they're running around like wild baboons having a blast and disrupting things like mad, you know. And so well, you got kids, you got to settle down, you know, like quit having so much fun. And it's kind of awful that you do that, but you do. And that's because the emotions and the motivations have to be brought into like a relationship with one another within the person, so that, you know, one thing I remember with my son, who is he's quite disagreeable by temperament, which is actually a good thing as far as I'm concerned, although it brings its own challenges. And so with my daughter, when she was misbehaving, she was pretty agreeable, and you know, if she was misbehaving, I could basically just look at her and then she'd quit, you know. But my son, it was like, that was just nothing. You're looking at me? It's like, no, that's just not going to go anywhere, man. And so then I'd like tell him to stop, and that really wasn't having much of an effect either. He'd just sort of maybe laugh or run away or whatever. I mean, he was a tough little rat. And you know, what I would do with him is he would be doing something and I'd interfere and he'd get upset and, you know, angry. And so then I'd get him to sit on the steps, and I told him, and this is when he was about 2, I said, look, you're going to sit on the steps, that's time out. You're going to sit on the steps until you've got control of yourself and you can come back and play the family game again. I basically said, be a civilized human being and then you're welcome again. And so he'd sit on the steps. It was so interesting to watch because he was just enraged. He'd sit there. Like, have you ever seen a 2-year-old have a temper tantrum? It's really quite the bloody phenomena. If you ever saw an adult do that, you'd call 911 right away. It's like, oh my God. And I've seen adults do that, you know, because people say with borderline personality disorder will have temper tantrums, and it's like, man, you want to be about 30 feet away from that person, that's for sure. It's really, but in kids it's like, well, first of all, they're only this long, so how much trouble can they really cause? But it's like, you know, they're just completely gone. They're like on the floor, their face is red, they're just furious, like way more furious than you ever get if you're even vaguely socialized. They're just outraged, and they're kicking and hitting the ground, and like, it's like a little epileptic fit of anger, you know. They're completely controlled by their rage. And we took care of one kid for a while who, he was actually a pushover, that kid. You could get him to behave by, you know, kind of shaking your finger at him, but his mother thought he was really tough because he had her figured out. And one of the things he would do is have a temper tantrum, and during the temper tantrum he would hold his bloody breath until he turned blue. It's like, try that, like, you know, that's your homework. Go home and have a temper tantrum, and while you're doing it, hold your breath until you actually turn blue. It's like, you won't be able to do it. You don't have the willpower of a 2-year-old, that's for sure. That little varmint, man, he'd just have a fit, then he'd hold his breath, and then he'd turn blue. It was like, wow, that's amazing. And we would just like let him do it, and you know, he'd turn blue and everybody would be gone and he'd come out of it, you know, and it didn't work, so he just quit doing it. I think he did it like twice, and he figured out, oh well, that's a lot of work for very little outcome. And you know, it's not like 2-year-olds are stupid. They're not stupid. They're probably smarter than you, but they're not civilized by any stretch of the imagination. And so anyways, back to my son, I'd put him on the steps and he'd be like, just like enraged and trying to get himself together, you know, and I'd wait a few, I had a strict rule, which was, as soon as you're done, you're welcome again. So it's completely under your control. You get yourself calmed down, you come and talk to me again. If you're calm enough so I like you, then you're welcome back in the family. No grudge, nothing.